Welcome to Ciao Bella, hosted by me, Erica Firpo, a travel journalist based in Rome. Each episode of Ciao Bella, I sit down with Italy's creators, contemporary artists and artisans, designers, culinary experts, heritage brands, and innovative aesthetes, and more who are defining and redefining 21st century Italy. Pull up a chair and join in. Welcome back. Today, I'm with Damian Burgess, a coffee consultant, which just means he's an incredible expert on coffee of all kinds, especially Italian coffee. And he's the founder of 3 Coffee Guys. Hey, Damian.
Good morning.
How are you?
I'm good. Very well. Enjoying the sunshine and the beautiful weather.
I am enjoying that too, which is why I told you right before we started recording that if I'm sneezing, you should feel happy for me because I'm outside and I'm really enjoying all the floral and fauna around me.
Great. We'll hear the birds chirping and the tractors going by.
Yeah, let's hope. Let's hope the tractor doesn't come. I'm so excited to talk to you. When I met Damian, just to give everybody background, I met Damian in right outside of Torino at a coffee academy for Caffe and it was kind of happenstance. I popped into this coffee event and I wasn't expecting to be so like in 5 minutes to learn so much about the fine tuning of making a cappuccino. I was kind of shocked, and I immediately was like, who is this guy? And I would love for you, I know who you are, but I'd love for you to tell everyone why I was so wowed and was like, Damian, please talk to me on my podcast.
Okay. Well, you said we met outside Torino, and you used to say I'm a coffee consultant and coffee expert here in Italy. But of course, you may hear it, I'm not actually Italian. I'm from New Zealand.
Is that the accent? I was wondering what part of Italy it was from.
That's the north, yeah. But you can always tell when the Italians speak English. And obviously, so I'm not Italian, I'm from New Zealand, but I've been living in Italy on and off, but definitely on for the last 20 years. And I've been involved in a lot of different industries, mainly hospitality. So I've worked in ski resorts and beach resorts. I've been a barman, a barista, a waiter, a chef, a bit of everything. But in the last 12 years, I've been involved just in the world of coffee. So I was working for, like you said, the roasting company Vergnano, and I was working for them as their coffee consultant, coffee trainer. And actually, the good thing about working for them, I had this opportunity, which I think a lot of other coffee trainers don't really get the opportunity to do. And the fact that I had an international background, so growing up in New Zealand, so for me, coffee was very much like most of the Anglo-Saxon world. So it was filter coffee. I remember Mum would always have a grinder at home as well. But then I'd spent a lot of time in Italy, so I understood very much the Italian side of things. But as I was working for the company, I was traveling quite a lot for them. We opened up a lot of coffee shops around the world. I was giving support to distributors in terms of training.
Can I interrupt you for a quick second? So, I know that you did a lot of different things and you're super sporty, but what was it about coffee that was the magnet that really pulled you in to say, okay, this is it?
If you talk to anyone in the coffee industry, they either say they were sort of born into it or it happened by chance. And of course, I was the second one. So at the time, I was actually working in a ski resort. I had a pub at a ski resort called Salsi Dukes. And this pub was more sort of opened in the evening. There was live music. It was a bar, dancing. But I was also getting to the point in my life where I'd had 2 daughters, they were very young at the time, and I could no longer be working until 5 o'clock in the morning and then getting up 2 hours later to take them to kindergarten. So it was a time I needed to do a bit of a change. And this company was looking for someone who had experience in terms of bar, could speak English, of course, because that was most important. And at the time, honestly, I didn't know any more about coffee than anyone in the industry would, which is actually very, very little. You wouldn't realize it, but most baristas don't have a good understanding of coffee itself. So when I started, I knew nothing. It was all open for me as well. And when I did the first interview with them, I didn't even know how to work the espresso machine I was given. So it was a very thrown into a situation where I had to learn. But it was interesting. It was a time when a lot of education on coffee was becoming more and more prominent. There was something called the Specialty Coffee Association, which was really pushing the education of coffee for consumers, for baristas, and for coffee lovers. So I was in the very first steps of that as it progressed.
Tell me, so you were mentioning you were working for Vignano, and when did it go from? I know you were traveling internationally for them, but when did it go from working with them to really building up this coffee academy? And could you tell us a little bit about that?
Okay. When I started, the whole idea was the Coffee Academy,
Okay.
because they needed someone who could do it. And the coffee training, as I said back then, wasn't a thing. Actually, it was quite frustrating. It was frustrating and very nerve-wracking because I was thinking to myself, "Oh my gosh, I'm a New Zealander who's going to be teaching Italians about coffee."
Yeah,
And the
that's
very
pretty
first time
risky.
I was terrified. I had to, and obviously I didn't have a lot of experience at the time, and people would ask me questions, and I'd be like, good question. I'm pleased you asked me that. And the whole time I was thinking, what does it even mean? What does it mean? But I found a lot of the Italians would come to the courses, and they would be very much like, "Oh, they've been making coffee for 20 years. I'll teach you about the coffee." But really, very, very quickly understood that they didn't have an understanding of the coffee itself. They thought they knew what they were doing because this is what their grandfather had taught them, but there was no understanding. So very quickly I realized that it wasn't so daunting after all, that I did have more knowledge than they did. And I began to really enjoy it. And I enjoyed those times when someone comes along and saying, now I'm going to teach you. I'm like, right, I'm going to really get them, because they just have this understanding of what they think they know without ever had any knowledge behind it, if that makes any sense.
No, I think it makes a lot of sense. It's kind of like, I mean, I think it's anybody that's like in any culture that there's something that really identifies to their culture. So by blood, they must know how to do it.
Yeah. And
It's funny.
Italians are very, very famous for that.
And I think with coffee, like I remember a really good friend of mine from Palermo was staying with us, and we were about to make him a cup of coffee, and he pushed us aside. We just have a little mocha, and he
Yeah.
pushed us aside, and he said, "Oh no, this is like Erika, non si fa così." And I was like, I'm just literally putting coffee. Like we weren't even talking about the coffee I bought. It was just making the mound of coffee, because he's like, "Ma
Hmm.
devi essere una montagna come Etna." Like he literally told me it had to be a mountain like Etna.
Yeah.
And I had to like make, so instead of packing it in, it had to be this thing. And I was like, and so then after that, for years after that, I think even when I met you, I was like, well, it has to be a mountain like Etna. Like that's how you put coffee in a mocha.
Well,
And that's
even the mocha pot, everyone has their own different ideas as well, because everyone's grandmother told them something different, and obviously, if the nonna says it, then it's religion. It's what exactly has to be right. So if you go around Italy today, everyone will tell you different ideas of how to make the perfect mocha. And I did a video just recently and did that as well on the mocha, and there's a lot of tricks and tips that a lot of Italians were like, "Oh, I didn't know that. Oh, I didn't know that." So there's, yeah, I can understand he was trying to tell you what to do, and probably it would have come from his grandmother, and the Mount Etna
exactly.
idea is quite system.
It's super charming, but it's like if I told you how to make the perfect chocolate chip cookies, because I can make the perfect chocolate, but it's only because I told you that. But you brought up you bring up a good point, because their coffee culture is, I think everybody identifies Italy with the cappuccino and the espresso, and in Italy we
Yeah,
make the best
for
coffee. But
sure.
one of the things that I find fascinating is there's different. It's subtly different coffee culture from the north to the south.
Oh, very much. Not
And
even so subtle, really.
well, I would love you to tell us some of the differences that you've noticed.
Um, Well, okay, you get a lot of people come over to Italy traveling, and you talk about the Italian coffee culture, when in reality there's not an Italian coffee culture. There's many. It literally is divided north to south, obviously, as you said, Erica, but also different regions have different Italian coffee cultures. And this is at first because when coffee first came to Italy, it came into the port of Venice, and obviously coffee as a history had been around a lot longer before it came to Italy. And actually, when it did come to Italy, the Italian Catholic Church wanted to ban it, because up
Really?
until then it was, yeah, well, it had been a drink used by the Dervish dancers and the 12 dancers, and it was something which the Muslims is almost seen as to help put into a trance. So it was seen as this Muslim devil's drink. So therefore, the Catholic Church wanted, right, no, sorry, a lot of the people wanted to ban it. And the Pope at the time, the Pope Clementine VIII, he said, well, hang on, before we ban it, let me just try it. And then he decided it was good enough that we should be drinking it as well. But back at the time, it came into Venice, and that was the very first port of call, because you had all these spices coming through into Venice. And when coffee first was to be imported into different places, it was coming basically into three main ports, being Naples, Venice, and Trieste. This is obviously going ahead quite a few years. But it was very much divided where the coffee was coming from. So the coffee which was being unloaded in Naples, or Napoli, was the coffees mainly coming from Africa, and these were your Robusta coffees. As opposed to the ones who were coming to the north, were coming from maybe Central America, South America, and they were more your Arabica style coffees. Now, for those who don't know, I talk about Arabica and Robusta. They're both two types of coffee. And I think the easiest way to sort of explain it is I'm talking about fruit. People don't realize that coffee is a fruit. So if I was to compare maybe coffee to apples, you've got so many different types of apples, the red ones, the green ones, the yellow ones, the golden delicious, the Granny Smiths. And of course, even though they're all apples, they have very different characteristics. So ones which might be a little more crunchier and sweeter, ones which might be a little more acidic and tart. And coffee is very much the same. So Robusta is, as a fruit, is a lot more deeper, bolder, intense flavors, more body, whereas your Arabica coffee is a lot more delicate, a lot more sweeter, possibly more complex, and more acidity. So you've got this very different, two different types of the coffee going to different regions in Italy straight away. So even today, and the reason I started saying all that was, so the north of Italy started consuming these coffees which were a lot more delicate. They were the Arabica coffees. Mm-hmm. Naples were having these coffees coming from Africa, which were these deep, dark, rich Robusta coffees. So, of course, at that point, the people are drinking what's available, and that becomes your norm. So even today, going forward probably a couple of 100 years, the coffees which are being drunk in the south are those coffees which are more your Robusta coffees. And they have a very, very different type of flavor. They create a different type of espresso completely. And you'll find that people in Napoli will tell you that they have the best coffee in all of Italy because of the water and all sorts of strange ideas. But it's literally a different
I've heard that.
type of coffee. Oh, yeah, it's a different type of coffee. So if you make it as an espresso, it's going to be very thick and very rich. It's going to have this dark crema on the top. And they'll tell you, there we go, another little fake news. They'll say that if you put sugar on the top of an espresso, if the sugar stays on top of that crema and then slowly drops on through, then it's a good espresso. Wow. When in reality, all you really need to do is have a lot of this Robusta type of coffee in the blend you're using, and it's going to create more crema, and therefore the sugar will stay on top. And if I was to give you only Arabica, there would be a lot less crema, and you wouldn't have the same effect, when possibly the Arabica could be a lot better coffee than the other one. So the crema is important, but it doesn't mean it's good just because the sugar stays on the top.
Oh, interesting. Can I ask you a question? Because is because it was Robusta, because it's Robusto, is that why traditionally, and stop me if I'm wrong, the coffee in Napoli, the preference is to have it zuccherato, sugared?
Yeah, for sure. Okay, then you've also got a lot of the Robustas. If we go back 100 years, the coffees which are coming from Africa were going to be low quality. And if you, once again, think about it as a fruit, so your low quality fruit is going to be a little more rotten, it's been eaten by insects, it's not going to be great. And in the world of coffee, to sort of hide, if I was to roast it quite light, all those defects would come out very strong in the cup of coffee. So if you roast it darker, it'll sort of cover them quite a lot. It'll become a very a deeper, darker, richer flavor, if you like, but you won't notice all these defects.
So roasting it darker would mean a longer roast?
Yes, let's get into a whole different subject.
Okay. Let's just say in coffee.
Let's just say a darker color. A darker color means the coffee will be more bitter. A lighter color means the coffee will be more sweeter, possibly more acidic. Okay. But what would happen is, because the coffee wasn't great quality, they would roast it darker. So you have this Robusta coffee roasted dark, and therefore you've got a very bitter cup of coffee. So sugar is pretty much natural. You have to put sugar in. It's almost undrinkable without it. Very subjective, but if you go to Naples today, you'll go into coffee shops, not in Naples, but a lot of different areas around the south, where the barista will automatically put sugar into the espresso if you don't ask for it. So they'll actually take the sugar, put it into the cup, the cup will go under the espresso machine, and you'd have it already sugared. In fact, if you don't want it, you'd have to ask it to be non zuccherato, so without sugar.
And then everyone licks you.
Yeah. Well, I remember doing a show once, and someone came along from South, this is in the first years, and he said, he asked me, have you already put sugar in it? And I looked at him and was like, what do you mean have I already put sugar in it? I was like, no. But then I realized later on, if you're coming from south, for them it's natural as well. But
Yeah.
also because they use those dark flavors, that bitter flavor, when they go to the north of Italy or maybe different region where the coffee blend itself is a lot more lighter and delicate, they consider it to be very wishy-washy and weak because they're used to this dark, deep, bold, and bitter coffee. And it doesn't make it better or worse. It's just literally different. That's all.
Interesting. Very, very interesting. Um, it's so funny because yeah, I've always I think, and maybe my mom's family is from Rome, and a lot of our friends are Southern. So for me, like an espresso zuccherato is like the way it should be. Like I would, and that's it's again that's why I always thought espresso was supposed to be like it should be served already sugared, in a hot cup as well. Um,
Custom come Yeah, if you go to some places that have this boiling hot cup as well in there. No, it's very different from different regions of Italy. But I mean, it's not wrong to put sugar in coffee. Like a lot of people ask me, is it wrong to put sugar in coffee? And the answer to that is no. You drink it the way you want it.
exactly.
However, what I would say is it's wrong to put sugar in there first without trying it, because
Ah,
it's like a chef's made you a great plate of food and you automatically, my dad would automatically take and put salt on anything without even tasting it, and maybe that plate already had too much salt in there and you just added to it
didn't
when
know
it didn't need it.
exactly. No, it's exactly you're absolutely right.
And because there are some coffees where if you put sugar in there, it will literally ruin them. It'll have a negative effect on it. Like in your coffees which come from the south, that sugar will actually help to highlight in a lot of different chocolatey caramel flavors. But if I was to put sugar into maybe a different type of blend where it's all Arabica, it's very complex and very fruity, and that sugar can almost kill this complex acidity that the cup can have. Is that getting too complex?
I mean, for me, it is because I didn't realize a cup of coffee was that deep. But but I actually, I think this is one of the amazing things about talking to you is that you you know so much, and there's such a not just a culture behind coffee because I think there's just almost I guess I would call it a science behind coffee that I took for granted.
For sure.
So that's like one of the things that really impressed me when I was talking to you the first time. We were at the machines, the machines that they have in bars. So you
Yeah.
were in front of all those different machines and you were talking about how there are all these different types of machines. And then you started talking about the temperatures. And I was like, what is that? He's crazy. I'm like, he's New Zealand. So he is, I literally said to myself, he doesn't know what he's talking about because he's from New Zealand.
I was
And,
just
and, and
going
then,
on. Yeah.
and then you explained that, how, I mean, you can explain it. I cannot, but I believe it was like depending on the type of coffee and what you're serving, the temperature changes. And that's something that you said a lot, that's part of what you were doing consulting on is you would go into these bars and they wouldn't even know how to use these incredible, 30, 40,000 euro machines.
Oh, you've got obviously that's changed a lot over the last few years. Technology's played a big part. If you look at the very first espresso machines, the idea was that hot water would have to flow through your coffee. Actually, if you compare it to your filter coffee that you normally make, your hot water sort of drops above it and it just falls through because of gravity. An espresso machine that's actually been pushed through with pressure. So the very first machines, you had hot water and it'd be forced through. Now, like you said, you've got machines which are just very, very complex, and you can control minutely the temperature, the pressure, things like pre-infusion, and there's a whole new world of complexity which has been added to the coffee. But then sometimes you get to the point where these fantastic machines have been put in the hands of baristas who don't understand the complexity, and it becomes almost superfluous. It's like giving a Ferrari to your mother to go and do the shopping. It's just, you're knocking out a second gear. And there
Well,
are
yeah,
some incredible machines.
I mean, when the ones that I saw with you, I was just, I mean, they were like Ferraris. They were incredible and beautiful, and some looked vintage, and some were like super, super high tech. I quickly because the machine, I love talking about the machines, but I just want to quickly go back and ask you a question about the coffee culture in Trieste. Um,
Yep.
so I know a lot of the coffee culture. In Italy, a lot of times people, the kind of knee jerk reaction is coffee culture is you go into a bar, you stand up. It's stand up bar. And that's what it is in Rome, and that's pretty much what it is in Naples. Whereas you said something really interesting was in Venice where coffee arrived. Venice is known for having those 3 or 4 historic 300-year-old cafes, and they were
Yep. The first one's
salons.
in Italy.
And
Yeah.
they're beautiful. And I mean, I'm a big fan of visiting them just because I love the history behind them. I love the way they look. I love the whole concept of I am at a 300-year-old coffee shop having a coffee. Even I don't care what it costs, even though it does get a
And
little
it does.
expensive. Exactly. But you know, in the idea of what you know what a coffee boutique or a coffee shop was back 300 years ago. It's to me, it's a beautiful analog moment in history that I love. And I'm curious, because I also know that in Torino, I've seen some beautiful coffee shops that somewhat remind me of Venice. What's it like in Trieste? Because I've never been
Um,
there.
well, you've got to remember that when coffee was first introduced into Italy, it was very much a rich man's drink. It wasn't for the common people. It was for the rich, the poets, the royal family. In fact, for that reason, that coffee went from there straight to Torino, because it's where the Savona family was at the time as well, the royal family. So it was very much linked to this posh society. So the coffee shops, when they developed, they were beautiful. They were, all the machines were had to be very ornamental. There was like a centerpiece to this culture of coffee, which was flamboyant. So therefore, like you said before, when you go into La Florienne in Venezia, it's beautiful. And that's because that's the clientele who were drinking coffee at the time. And then it did change, obviously, coming down, became sort of more a common man's drink in the early 1900s, when the whole coffee culture changed and espresso machines came about. But everywhere around Italy, the Italians will stand at a bar. You have to, and you'll be shoulder to shoulder, and you have to budge your way through. And of course, Italians don't know how to line up, so you sort of have to yell and make yourself heard. And that's also, I suppose, the beautiful part of Italian coffee culture that I think people come to Italy to be part of, because there's nowhere else in the world, and I don't know if that's quite true, but I'd hesitate to say it is, there's nowhere else in the world where everyone will stand at a bar and have their espresso. And I've done a lot of openings with Italy, in Chicago and New York and different places around the world. And you always know the Italians because they're the ones who walk up and stand at the bar. Whereas all the rest of the world doesn't have that whole concept of I drink a coffee standing up. And I suppose the idea is you can sort of see what the barista is doing and you can control them and you can make sure your coffee's looking good. But also because your coffee should be drank not when it's before it gets cold, which is another reason why in restaurants often we don't drink a great espresso, because it takes so long to get from machine to in front of you as a customer.
And I think, one of the things, it's funny that you would say that. One of the things I've noticed, restaurants, but also in hotels, I've noticed hotels, even in Italy, have a really hard time making a good coffee. Oftentimes it comes and it's served burnt. Like you'll have a cappuccino that's burnt, and it's like I'm still trying to figure out, but I'm assuming they don't know how to use their machines, or they don't
There's a
have
bit of
machines.
everything. When you asked about the machines before, the espresso machine, but actually the machine which is probably even more important is the grinder. The way that
Ah,
coffee has been transferred from beans to
and you
your
know
ground
why I'm
powder.
laughing, because I called you the other day saying, well, what do I do? Yeah, tell me a little bit about the grinder.
Um,
Why is that so important?
because this is where coffee gets complex when we talk about training. The baristas have to make sure that their grinder is set just right. And what that means is that as the coffee beans are being ground, that the actual particle size is not too small or not too large. And what would happen if your coffee is ground too coarse, the water is able to flow through very quickly. There's less resistance, so the water flows through very quickly. And this is true for if you're making American coffee as well, the filter coffee. If it's too coarse, the water will flow through, and the water won't have time to absorb flavor from your ground coffee. So
Mhm.
therefore, you have a cup of coffee which is very watery, very weak. However, at the same time, if your ground coffee is too fine, and once again, this is also true for making a filter coffee, the water is not able to flow through, and therefore it sort of sits and it becomes muddy. And when it does drop below, it's had too much flavor. So you have something which is a very muddled, very overbalanced. It's called over extracted, but not a very balanced cup of coffee as well. So the grinder for the barista, that means that he needs to make sure it's just right. And for an espresso, it's more precise again. For a filter coffee, you can sort of get away with it. It's not perfect. But for an espresso, the difference between the water flowing through in 15 seconds or the water flowing through in 20 seconds is a completely different cup of coffee, a completely different cup of espresso. So the barista needs to make sure that it's always perfect. Now, the part that makes it frustrating or exciting, depending on your point of view, that the coffee actually changes. Now, you don't realize it, but your coffee breathes, if you like. The roasted coffee will absorb humidity or release humidity, depending on what the values are outside. It'll also absorb aroma as well. So what will happen is, if it's very humid, that your coffee beans will actually absorb humidity, and it means that as it passes through your grinder, it will actually fragment differently. So you wouldn't have the same particle size. And that means that the barista would have to adjust the grinder to bring it back to what he wanted. How's that? Is that confusing?
I mean, that's really, really, really complex and really interesting. Okay. I mean,
And then some coffees are more difficult to look after than others as well. If you have your Robusta coffees, it's a little more forgiving, and other coffees a little more difficult. And that's the true, when you talk about a good barista and a bad barista, of course it's your coffee knowledge, but actually no. The most important thing and the most important difference between a good barista and bad barista is that a good barista will look after his clients. No matter what you're doing, the clients are always first, making sure they're happy. And sometimes the value of a smile is more important than the value of a good cup of coffee or a drink. But beyond that, the good barista will actually understand everything that he's doing with his grinder, with the water temperature, and all those little nuances, which will make the difference between that perfect cup of coffee as much as possible. I wouldn't say always, because it doesn't matter how good you are, the coffee actually changes and you can't make it perfect always. But as good as possible, as often as possible.
How easy is it, or how does it take a lot to, or say I'm a barista. I'm just doing what I normally do, is I'm just putting I just signed up. I like been working at this beautiful little cafe for a while, but I'm just doing what I think you're supposed to do. Put the coffee in the thing and make the coffee, make an espresso, make a macchiato. You come in as this consultant. How long would it take I guess it depends on how open-minded the person is to really understand, or.
It does, but I think if I'm doing my job well, I wouldn't go in and just teach people, because it doesn't get the message across. If I'm doing my job well, I'll go in and I'll make that new barista realize that their job's really interesting. There's so much there is to learn. So they'll come away going, that was fantastic. Like you said, when you came in and I was just waffling all sorts of different things to you, but you were like, wow, I never realized there was so much about it. And if I can make it interesting for that barista, then all of a sudden their job becomes much, much better, more exciting to them as well. I can talk coffee for 1 hour or a week, but if I give too much information and too little time as well, it becomes an overload. So that's not good. So it's enough to make information to realize that there's so much to learn, but also for them to realize that they've actually learned something important in that short time they had at first.
Well, it's interesting. After I met you, what I will say is I started looking at my baristas differently, and looking at what's kind of going on behind the scenes, and what they're, how they're paying attention to what they're doing. And because before, I would get, a macchiato, and that was, I get my macchiato and I sip it really quickly, and that was it. And I never really, I loved looking at the machine because the machine is really pretty, but I never really looked at the story that's going on in that exact moment.
There's a lot of telltale signs that even as a customer, you can see if they're doing a good job or not. The first thing I would do when I walk into any place is I'll look at the grinder. And if I see that the hopper, so the transparent part on top of the grinder, which holds the ground coffee, the coffee beans, if that's dirty, if it's been covered in oil, because your coffee releases oil. So this coffee's releasing oil, and if that oil then stays on the hopper for a long time, that'll become rancid and brown and oxidized. And if you see that in a coffee shop, already for me, that's like a big no-no. And then I'll look at the state of the machine. The machine needs to be clean. You're a chef making something special for your customers, and there's no chef in the world who's going to be using dirty pots and pans. He has to make sure that this kitchen is immaculate, his equipment is clean. And as a barista, it's the same. If I walk in and I see a machine where there's a lollipop of gorgonzola cheese around the steam wand, then there's no way I'm going to be ordering a macchiato, because that steam wand hasn't been cleaned for who knows how long. And there's so much bacteria and things moving on the end of it. And there's many parts of the machine which needs to be cleaned. So my daughters play volleyball, and often we'll drop the girls off at the game, and all the parents will go to a bar for a cup of coffee. And as we walk in, they all sort of look at me as if to see if I'm going to order coffee. But I walk in, I look at the machine, they all look, and I get a little shake of the head, and everyone's like, no, water, beer, fruit juice.
That must be a lot of fun, actually.
Yeah, but they hate me as well because I have to hold myself back sometimes, of course. The thing is, when you do know good coffee, you know bad coffee, you have to be patient sometimes. But there are times I just won't order it, and it's easier. And then there's times when I do order it, and it's oh great, macchiato, espresso, double. So of course they all ask for something different because that's what Italians do.
You know what? Actually,
Um,
that's a great point. I think a lot of people, I think a lot of people when they come to Italy, they get the cappuccino at the bar, and they drink it too long. Please, everybody, don't stand at a bar and drink cappuccino too long because then I can't get to my bar. um, and then
and never after lunch, of course, because
oh
then you're
yeah,
really in trouble.
well, that's yes. But you can have the macchiato, which just has a little bit. But I want one of the things I think, I'm a big, I feel like I'm a promoter of the shakerato or the shakerato, however you want to pronounce it.
Yep.
And I love sharing the outside of the realm of macchiato, espresso, and cappuccino, because I think a lot of people come to Italy, especially when you come in the summertime and you get the cappuccino. I'm like, no, don't do it. It's too hot. I'd love for you to share some of the more uncommon but Italian coffee drinks.
Okay, this is good. This goes back to you asking before about the different regions of Italy. So a lot of them will all have a different, like you say, coffee drink. Across the board, you've always got your espresso, your macchiato, your cappuccino, latte macchiato, which now has pretty much been abbreviated around the world to latte. So a latte macchiato would be your glass of foamed milk with your espresso, which has been marked onto the milk, which the word macchiato means marked. But you get around the world, no one ever says latte macchiato, they just say latte. So your baristas in everywhere except for Italy will know that a latte is latte with espresso. And this happens always, when people come to Italy and they think, I'm going to ask for a latte, and they walk up to the bar and ask for a latte, and then they get given a glass of
Milk.
cold milk. Because you're literally asking for a glass of milk when you ask for a latte. But that's all. That's everywhere in Italy as well. Your cafe shakerato is an espresso, which is then put into a shaker with ice, shaken. So the word shakerato means shaken. Often you may add or sugar syrup, or it gets better when you add things like amaretto, Bailey's, from the word of English, hazelnut syrup and things like that. So you can be having a lot of different flavors added to it, which is quite unusual because Italians are very purist in their coffee drinking. But when it comes to shakerato, you're allowed to add things to it there. And you get this, if the barista does it well, you get this beautiful foam on the top of your cold iced coffee as well. Now in America right now, a lot of people have what's called cold brew. The difference between a cold brew and a shakerato, your cold brew is actually been made cold from the very beginning. So the water was cold water in the very beginning, and it takes maybe up to 20 hours. But when you use a shakerato, you're
Ah,
making a hot coffee and turning it cold. So it actually will extract different flavors. But the idea is your shakerato will be, and I prefer a double espresso, put onto ice and shaken until you
and
get
then
this
much,
beautiful
yeah.
foam.
In fact, you have a great video that I saw you doing that, and I believe that I've done that. I have made my shakerato a la Damien.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
That video is well old. I've got no
I know.
grey hair.
I found it on YouTube. Um, you
um,
I've I quick question because I know like so when I was the other day I was at another coffee shop, one of my favorite coffee shops in Rome, and it's a Neapolitan coffee shop, and they were like, oh no, now we have this new summer drink called the Romeo and Giulietta, and it's essentially the cold version of what they call a monachella, which is it's cold coffee or cold espresso, and then they put chocolate syrup, and then they put well, no, they put it's crema di cafe, sorry, crema di cafe,
yeah, yeah.
or almost like a mousse di cafe, and then
Which this
chocolate
That's another
syrup.
thing which doesn't really exist out of Italy. They've tried to do it in different places, but this crema di cafe hasn't caught on anywhere else.
I know.
Actually, you've
Could
got
you
to
tell
realize,
everybody what
well,
the crema di cafe is?
you said a mousse. It's like a soft serve ice cream. It's like a cold yogurt. How do you? I don't know, it's strange. And it's mainly just as a barista, you just add milk, mix it up, and then pour it into your granita machine. So it's a soft serve ice cream. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Um,
soft
but
serve
the thing is,
coffee ice cream.
yeah, soft serve coffee ice cream. Exactly what it is. But if you look at all of the coffee drinks in Italy, the portions are small. You don't have a grande, you don't have a
No.
half a liter of coffee. But the flavors are very, okay, this is where Italians are very good. They understand flavor. They understand this balance of flavor. So when you have, for example, in Piemonte, where I am, a drink which is called a bicchierino. A bicchierino in dialect literally means little cup. So you've got a glass which is about 150 ml, so therefore about half the size of a cappuccino, a single serve normal cappuccino. And it'll have this very dark, rich chocolate on the bottom, liquid chocolate, often with hazelnut, because the area of Piemonte is very famous for hazelnuts as well, which is where Nutella comes from. Then you have espresso, and then you have this layer of thick, sweet cream on the top as well. And there's a lot of different variations.
And it's always a glass cup,
It's
right?
always glass. You can still see these three layers, yeah, because it's very, very visual, very Instagrammable. But because you have this rich, dark chocolate, and espresso can only really be 25 mils, and then this layer of the cream, you're talking about a very small portion, but it's a portion of intense flavors. Now, you can't transform that into a half a liter of coffee that you'd have in America. It just doesn't work. You can't do it. And a lot of the drinks around Italy are very much like that. You said the Romeo and Giulietta. For sure, it's probably the same sort of size. 100 mils would
Yeah,
be
it's
big as it
tiny.
gets.
It's
Yeah.
like they put it in. They actually don't do it in vetro, which I was really surprised because it'd be nice to see. They did it in. I don't think they did it in vetro. Now I thought they did it in an espresso cup, but the taller one.
Yeah.
Um, Quick question, because I know a few years back I saw an article in probably like the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal about third wave coffee, maybe in Trieste as well.
Yeah.
Can you? That's an area, and maybe because I do become like a coffee purist, and I automatically turn off like when I hear the word cold brew or the nitrogen thing or
Hmm.
third wave. Could you tell me a little bit about that and what's happening in Italy?
Um, put into focus, coffee itself. Okay, once again, it's a fruit, so therefore it grows in plantations and it comes from a lot of different places around the world. But a lot of the places where coffee comes from are obviously your poorer countries, and the actual farmers themselves maybe don't have a great understanding of farming in terms of the complexity of what it can be. So if I was to import coffee from many countries 100 years ago, the plants would grow, the farmer would pick it, and that's as good as it really got. They'd have to transform it into these beans and let it to dry. But if I actually go down the track to in recent years, there's been a lot of focus and a lot of research into the farming of coffee to actually bring up the quality of the beans which they're growing. So you've got these plantations which are growing coffee cherries where the quality is a lot more than what it used to be. And by that I mean that you can have a lot more complex flavors coming out of your coffee that once upon a time weren't there. If I don't have the beans which are rotting, if I don't have insects eating it, if I don't have different diseases on my plant, my fruit is going to taste better. So this is the whole idea of this. You said third wave coffee, but there's definitely specialty coffees. There's coffees out there which are amazing now, and it would be a shame to mix them with milk. It'd be a shame. They used to be more purist in it because if I compare it to wine, here we go. This is probably even better. Wine and coffee are very, very similar. They both come from fruit. It's transformed into a drink. Wine can be made from a lot of different grapes, whether you're Nebbiolo or your Cabernet, your Merlot, and of course they all have different flavors. The one that you like is the best one for you, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's the better wine either. You can have a $2 bottle of wine which you prefer to a $100 bottle of wine. So coffee is very much the same. All of a sudden there's this world of the farmers are paying a lot more attention to the coffee they're growing, maybe even only one area of their plantation, to grow something a lot special, which in return means that they can sell that coffee for a higher profit because the honest truth of the world behind coffee, that the people who actually put in most of the work are the people making the least amount of money.
Mm-hmm.
And now they're actually able to grow coffee where rather than selling it for maybe $2 a kilo, they're even able to sell it for $200 a kilo. So this whole idea of, you say third world, it's a lot more artisanal, it's a lot more high quality, and there are coffees out there which are incredible. But if you're in Naples and you're used to drinking darkly roasted Robusta, you'd never appreciate it because it's just such a different realm of flavors that you're not used to as well.
Now I know I really quickly said in the very beginning that you're the founder of Three Coffee Guys, and this ties in
Yeah.
directly to what you just talked about. So I'd love for you to tell everybody what Coffee Guys is, and I know you're one of three. because it
And
says
one
so
of
in your,
three. Yeah,
it
that's a
says, it
giveaway.
says in your bio. And I thought that was really clever. I was like, oh, really? But, I think talking about the complexities of coffee growing and the revaluing coffee ties directly into what you're doing with Three Coffee Guys. So would you share what that is?
Well, as the world, there's actually a big community of coffee people all around the world. So there's a lot of trade shows, of course, and different events we'll go to, and you're often meeting up with the same people. So there's a lot of different friends in the world of coffee. Now, we also, as a trainer, a lot of the time people who become interested in coffee and want to learn more have said to me in the past, "Oh, I'd love to go visit a plantation. I'd love to see." Because if you're going to be a sommelier, you're never going to be a sommelier of wine without actually visiting a vineyard and seeing how wine is created. So in the world of coffee, it's very much the same. People want to see that world behind every cup of coffee. So there was myself and two other coffee guys, Patrick O'Malley, who's from Arizona in America, and Ricardo Viegas, who's from Colombia. And the three of us got together and said, well, listen, why don't we organize and bring some people to see a plantation and show them what it's all about? So Ricardo, being from Bogota in Colombia, he was able to organize everything on his side. Patrick and I basically just got a few people who are interested together, and this was in 2017, and just took a few coffee lovers, baristas, and a few people, I think it was about 20 of us in total, to go and visit a plantation. And plantations are, if you go to the countries of origin, the plantations are a wonderful area where tourists don't go. So you're not visiting tourist sites, you're very much in the countryside, you're visiting the real Colombia, the real Ethiopia, or wherever you might be going. And you get a whole feel of what, not only what coffee is all about, but the people behind coffee. And it makes you realize that it's a very much a people trade. There's only over 200 million people in the world who work somehow connected with the industry of coffee. And a lot of those are people in the farms. A lot of the people who grow coffee are small family farmers. Then, of course, you can go to Brazil and you have this huge commercial trade as well. But it's a world which is interesting and hardship, and there's a lot behind it. So we organized Three Coffee Guys to bring people to see this reality as well. So we started off with Colombia. We then took people to Honduras. Last year, we took people to Ethiopia, which was incredible. Incredible because there's the whole coffee side as well, but then it's just such an incredible place to visit in terms of humanic side. We'd been, all of us, there's 25 of us, and all of us at one time or the other had a tear in our eye just on the emotion of, you've seen these people who really don't have very much. They literally live in mud huts, and yet they'd invite us into their homes and give us what they had as well. And they're the happiest people I've ever seen. They're working all the time. The ladies would be working in the plantation. So there's a lot of different phases which go through the coffee. It has to be harvested, of course. So it literally means the ladies have to walk into the plantation with a basket in their hand and cherry by cherry pick them off the plant. But then before these cherries are exported the country, they need to be able to remove the outer skin. Being a fruit, you have to take away the skin, the pulp. It has to be dried to the point you actually get these dry coffee beans. And there's a lot of different processes we can be doing there. And now the world of specialty coffee, people are playing with different types of fermentation and different processes, and this enhances different flavors. And all these ladies will be in what's called the drying bed. So the coffee needs to stay under the sun to dry anywhere up from a day to even 20 days, depending on the different methods you can use. And these ladies are just singing and dancing and chatting away the whole day long as they work. And they were there from as soon as we woke up in the morning until when we left them at nighttime. They would just be there working. And it just makes you appreciate that behind every cup of coffee, there's a lot of people, there's a lot of emotion, there's a lot of work that goes into it.
That's a beautiful way to describe it. What I'm curious, you mentioned something earlier, and you just mentioned this as well now. I think you did. The SCA and are part of, aside from coffee education and understanding coffee culture, is there also a technical aspect to what Three Guys is doing, as like for training or that cupping? There's that. Is it like a cup?
Yeah. Yep, cupping. So the idea was, if we were taking people to a plantation, we wanted to be able to give more than just shown them how a coffee plantation works. So we're actually doing a lot of training as well. So you mentioned the SCA, which is called the Specialty Coffee Association. And when I first started in coffee, I said before that this is when this whole training thing was coming about, that actually created a system where you could follow different courses. And now this has evolved to a point where there are different it's almost like a university degree, if you like. You can follow different subjects. So they're divided into the world of green coffee, so people can really understand the green coffee, the different types of varieties, the markets. You can understand the world of sensory skills. So this is where you said cupping, where you can actually taste your different coffees and understand the complexity of each cup. So I'd compare that, so I suppose, to sommelier of coffee, if you like. And the very first level, you sort of taste an Arabica and taste an Robusta and understand the differences. And as you progress all the way through, you become a Q grader to really be an expert in the world of cupping coffee, of tasting coffee. You can learn how to roast coffee. From the very beginning, it's very simple. You take green beans, you put it into the roast machine, it spins around for a while and comes out. And then you get into the very complexity of realizing there's a whole lot of different reactions and temperatures and things which can happen to change the flavors of your roast, depending on your roast profile. There's a world of barista skills. So as a barista, learning all the complexity of your machine, your grinder, how to make the great cup of coffee, even if you like latte art. So learning how to do pretty pictures on your cappuccino. And brewing. So the last one is also learning how to make everything that's not an espresso. So your mocha pots, your V60s, your Chemexes. In fact, yesterday I posted a video of what's called a fin filter. I don't know if you saw that.
On Instagram, on IGTV?
Yeah.
In fact, I wanted to let everybody know. Damian, can you tell everybody your Instagram profile?
I'm Damian, Damian, Coffee Guy.
And he's got a whole series of videos. So you were also saying that you have how to make the best mocha, right?
Yep, that's on the YouTube channel. That started years and years ago. So I think over the last few months, it's been fun just to make these videos at home. So the last one, a fin filter, which is something which is a little contraption which comes from Vietnam. Because a lot of people, you look today, if you're into coffee on the internet, there's a lot of people showing you how to make a Chemex and a V60, which are probably the more normal ones you might see. So I thought I was going to do something a little different. So I pulled out a fin filter and did a video on that.
Is that an out of norm coffee brewing guide? Is that what it is?
Yeah, because it's just a little unusual. You know, people know the normal one, so I thought I'd do something a little bit different. And then I grabbed my daughters and made them part of the video, which is fun.
Oh, I'm gonna show it to my girls.
Yeah.
Because maybe they'll actually want to do something with us. They refuse to be in the videos unless it's about them. I see you have. I see. Yeah.
Sorry, carry on.
No, go ahead.
I said there's a little scene at the end where they didn't realize I was filming them and they started arguing and screaming over who got to drink the cup of coffee I made. And they were saying, I'm the star of the show. No, I'm the star of the show.
Okay, that I definitely have to show to them because my girls will love that. Out of curiosity, do they drink coffee? Like,
yes.
They're like 15 and 17, right?
Yeah, they do. In fact, at the moment, we're still going through quarantine over here. So it's been all at home and they'll be asking me for a cup of coffee in the morning. I get little messages saying, Daddy, bring me coffee. And every one of them, my wife or two daughters, has a different request. So my wife wants her espresso. That's easy enough, make the espresso in the morning. And the daughters have become, they want to try different things as well. So I don't want to use the word Starbucks, but this whole idea of doing caramel lattes and things is only just starting to come into Italy. They don't really exist. As I said before, coffee is very purist, is espresso and cappuccino. But now the younger generation want to try your caramel lattes, your vanilla things, which I've actually had fun introducing it to them to see what their reactions are, because it doesn't exist in Italy, but there's also a new market for different types of coffees, which I think we'll start to see come about as well. So yeah, we're making coffee for them pretty much every morning.
I'm going to ask a question that I think polarizes a lot of people that live in Italy, depending on who you are, where you come from. And I'd love your opinion. Their Starbucks has the roasteria or the roastery in Milan.
In Milan.
And it's a beautiful space. It is definitely
amazing.
Yeah, but it is not the typical Italian coffee bar. It's not the typical Starbucks either.
No.
And when they open that and then they put the news out there that I think more regular Starbucks will, or there is going to be the arrival of regular Starbucks in Italy. There was like a lot of people were really angry, and I'm not going to say a lot of them were Italian because we have a high school age daughter who is completely, everything she does is Italian. Her life is Italian. She is Italian, and her and her friends were really happy to
Yeah.
hear that. And it wasn't that it was taking away from their Italian identity. They just thought it was cool. And I wanted to know, like, but I think a lot of the fear from certain people was that if Starbucks arrives, it's going to make the Italian coffee bar go extinct. And I'd love to know what your thought is on that.
I'm happy that Starbucks came to Italy. I think not that's going to make the Italian coffee bars extinct, but maybe show us a little change. Because, like we said before, coffee in Italy is espresso and cappuccino. And that's pretty much it, or mocha if you're at home. But there's so much more to coffee. When I was talking about the specialty coffee, when I was talking about this amazing work that's going in the plantations, it's never going to be appreciated in a classic coffee shop in Italy because it's very, very different to what they're used to. So having something like Starbucks coming in, they're actually introducing more innovative ways of drinking coffee, and that's only a good thing. It can help to open up the mentality a little bit. It can help the market to introduce different things. And as much as I was talking about, I said a caramel iced latte and things, if the coffee shops can start to introduce more drinks to accommodate for the younger generation, then all they're doing is helping the businesses to run better. If you actually look back maybe 20 years ago, your coffee shops in Italy would sell only coffee. You would literally have a cafeteria and that would be it. But even today as a business, it's very difficult for them to work only on coffee. Apart from brioches and things as well. But now they'll have lunch, they'll have to aperitivo in the evening. They're extending the business hours just to try and turn over money because it's not the same business it was once upon a time. So this new innovation, this new things coming into the country is only really helping the coffee culture to develop and grow. We don't need to be always set in their ways. This is how grandma did it, so this is the way it is. Sometimes new can be a good thing, and as well as I do, Italians don't do change very well at all. It's very difficult for them. But the new generation are much more open-minded to it. So I think that it'll actually help to develop, not to close down or change, but develop the coffee industry in Italy, make it a little bit more. And that coffee culture of the espresso at the bar should be and will always be there because we're very set as Italians in our ways, and that's how it should be drunk. But let's open up to the younger generation and let them enjoy new things as well because they're more open to it.
I agree. And I think, you know what, I always tell people that get really upset about that, the bar culture will always be there because it's the kind of thing that is part of Italian culture. So this can only just open up another dimension. And, you're absolutely right. Also, one of the things I interviewed I just decided to interview a bunch of kids when Starbucks opened here, just to say,
Okay.
like, what did you feel? And this one girl said to me, she was traveling. She actually traveled from Rome to go to the Starbucks to Milan. And I was like, okay,
Wow.
that is intense. And she said, yeah, but she's like, because this, and actually, sorry, it was her and actually the taxi driver. I asked a taxi driver the same thing, and they both said the same answer. They said, this this reminds us that we have the world open to us, that we have hope. And I was like, that a coffee shop does that. And they're like, yeah, because seeing this it doesn't mean that we're not Italian. It doesn't change anything for us, but it reminds us that we can do things that we normally can't do. And I was like, that is an incredible answer. Damian, I'm so happy I had the chance to speak to you. Thank you for taking the time to speak with me. I'm really looking forward to, hopefully the next time the next time I see you in person, I would like to do what your daughter's doing and ask you to make me a bunch of different kinds of coffee drinks. But
I'd love
suffice
to
to
be able
say,
to do it.
well, it was, again, like I said, it was so cool. It was such an eye opener, and it's really nice for me to see behind the bar what really, more than what I see. And actually it sounds like with three coffee guys, it seems like what you said, you're seeing what goes into a coffee cup is a whole world.
Yeah.
And
Well, yeah, when you came along and did that, that's what I enjoy most about what I do. It's just opening the eyes to people who think coffee's coffee, and just showing them so much more, and watching these people get excited. It's great fun. That's the most exciting part of my job.
Well, you definitely do a great job. Thank you so much. Now, I just want to tell everybody, so Damian is Damian Coffee Guy on Instagram.
Yeah,
And 3 Coffee Guys is the number 3coffeeguys.com, correct?
that's right. And the idea is each year we run, we're aiming for maybe 3 coffee trips a year, so to different places. So the idea for this year was um, Colombia, Brazil, and Asia somewhere. At the moment, obviously, things are a little bit on hold. But going towards the future, the idea is different types of trips as well. And maybe some of them which will be only for roasters, but even for coffee lovers, because there's a lot of beautiful areas to visit. So the idea is even to make it like almost a luxury trip as well. There's a lot of coffee plantations who are starting to open up for tourism. So you have these almost 5-star resorts within the coffee industry starting to come through. So in the future, we want to actually bring people to those places as well.
Well, when you were talking about Ethiopia, I decided, since I am sitting in front of my computer, I did look at the pictures as you were talking about it from your site, and I was like, I will be going on that trip. It looked incredible.
That was incredible. We had a lady who came along with us. She's about 45, early 50s. And for her, it was actually rough. You've got to realize you're not living, I talk about 5-star resorts, but the reality is most of the time, 99% of the time, you're almost sleeping in bungalow conditions. And it's not a trip. It's not a holiday. It's hard work. And this lady at the times, she found it very difficult, but now she talks about it like the most amazing experience she's ever been on. So you have to realize you're in for a bit of a hard time. Hot water is a luxury you won't get most of the time. And food, you just eat whatever's there, and you have to be very adventurous. But that's a great part about it.
It sounds incredible. Thank you, Damian. I really can't wait to see you in person, and looking forward to seeing more of what you do.
Thank you very much, Erica. It's great talking with you.
Great talking with you too. Ciao tutti.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Ciao Bella. If you'd like to know more about today's guest, please visit ciaobella.co and click on the podcast link, or go directly to ciaobella.co/podcast. Want more Italy? You can find all my episodes on iTunes and Spotify and Stitcher. When you have time, subscribe to iTunes and rate the podcast. What are you waiting for? And if you want to be part of the podcast, email me or DM me your Italy questions. To learn more about me and my work, go to my website, ericafirpo.com, and follow my Italy adventures on Instagram at ericafirpo. Ciao, Bella! And a very big thank you and hug to Massimiliano Yonta and Disc to Disc Studios, the producers of Ciao Bella, who continue to make me sound and feel great.